Time no longer. Chapter 15, Lucifer. Chapters 11, 12, and 13 of Revelation give the reader a short review of the great conflict of the ages. Chapter 11 speaks of Jews in prophecy, and the second woe is that of World War II. Chapter 12 outlines the Christian church as it travels along the bumpy road of the Middle Ages. Chapter 13 talks of the events occurring as the time of the end begins in 1798. Hidden away in this chapter is the first mention of an obscure beast. John 13:11 speaks of a little two-horned beast. It has two horns like a lamb, but it speaks as a dragon. This is the unluckiest of all the beasts. It means well. It sets the proper goals with the highest of ideals, yet it will be the last of the terrible parade of beasts of Revelation to walk the planet. It, the United States of America, will be the last world power. It will be the mightiest nation in Earth's history, but it will succumb, like all the rest, to internal corruption. These chapters give us further insight into what will occur from 1948, the end of the 5-month period, until the end of the time of the end. At the end of this period, time will be no longer, and the 7 last plagues will commence. Chapter 12 commences with a discussion of God's Christian church after the birth of Christ, his Son. Christ established his church, placing his apostles in positions of leadership. The great red dragon had killed the man-child, the Son of God. However, Jesus Christ would overcome the greatest odds in the history of the universe. He conquered death and saved mankind from eternal destruction. He then returned to heaven victorious. His newly established group of followers, led by his 12 apostles, began to develop his church. Peter, James, and John took the lead, but it was Paul who took the gospel to the ends of the known world. Paul was a Roman citizen and a witness to the stoning of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. He was subsequently converted to the Christian faith and became the most vocal proponent of Christ and his teachings. He wrote several books of the Bible, which were originally letters to the early churches. Paul took his case all the way to the cultural centers of the world, including Athens and Rome. His dissertation on Mars Hill is one of the greatest lectures in recorded history. The church grew by leaps and bounds, but seemingly, as with all earthly organizations, greed and the quest for power crept in and corrupted God's church. Many of the believers did remain faithful, but the price was high. The papacy was established in AD 538, but it gradually became corrupt. It eventually reached the point where it actually had some of Christ's followers killed. It underwent a terrible self-transformation. Its original intent was to propagate Christianity. It was instituted to teach people of Christ and save lives, but as with so many organizations, deviation from its area of expertise leads to a metamorphosis. Make no mistake, there were good people in the organization, but the hierarchy, through greed and needing to maintain its power base, was converted from a religious body into a political machine. This for-profit church was the most powerful political body in Europe and the known world for the next 1260 years. The politically involved religious body continued in power until February 20, 1798. It was on this date that Napoleon's general, Berthier, took Pope Pius VI captive. Exactly 1260 years had passed, just as John the Revelator had prophesied. Prophecy of Revelation is absolutely amazing in its accuracy and exactness. Remember, John wrote Revelation in the 1st century AD, almost 2,000 years ago. He had no access to today's knowledge or technology. He never heard of a gun or a bomb or a computer. Yet repeatedly he is right on the money. He is totally accurate in every detail. As the history of this planet unfolds, we see his prophecies coming true time after time. There can be no question but that John had true inspiration. Only a true God could be 100% right. He and the prophets are correct every time. It remains for us to complete the interpretation as Peter admonished. No prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation. 2 Peter 1:29. Surprisingly enough, it is this point in the prophetic discussion that a discussion of Satan's expulsion from heaven is chronologically placed. It is stated that the devil has come down to you with great wrath. Revelation 12:12. The premise is that the war in heaven between Michael or Christ and his angels and the devil occurred after his resurrection and subsequent return to heaven. We are told that Christ returned to heaven shortly after his resurrection, and though he stayed there for only a brief period, it was enough time for God to forever banish Satan and his hordes of angels from heaven. God now had irrefutable proof that his was the only way for the universe to continue to exist. Christ, his Son, was real, living proof. Satan was banished from paradise, stripped of his power, and placed on our sinful, deteriorating earth. Aside from the atmosphere and his hate for God and his Son, the place the devil was banished to is the worst place in the universe. Decrepit old earth. He had lived in the palaces of heaven, but now he was confined to the caves of the earth. Once this shock wore off, the hate came to a boiling point. Lucifer now redoubled his efforts to overthrow the king of the universe. He would not rest until he had completed his task. God had tolerated Lucifer up to this point. He had no real basis for expelling him from heaven. Lucifer at this point had only raised some questions, albeit important ones. God's many joys included creating, but now he must answer these questions to his authority, thus proving his rightful place as the king of the universe. He may have done this before, the Bible does not say. Nevertheless, this new human race of peoples would be a test of wills and authority. God waited and watched and nurtured and guided humanity for 4,000 years, but every human being had failed him miserably. As he had known all along in this experiment of the ages, they would all fail. This was the last straw. He had to either destroy humanity and start over or send his Son as a sacrificial lamb to validate his authority. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3:16. Decision was never in doubt. God's love would not allow him to destroy his beloved children. There was a possibility of saving even one human being, 1 out of 20 billion. That is absurd, you say. That, my friend, is the love of God. Remember, Christ is not a prophet. He is God. He was dead, yet he lives. No prophet, no angel, not even the evil one has that kind of power. We cannot begin to imagine the anger this circumstance invoked in the Almighty. He threw the devil out of the house, along with 1/3 of the angels of heaven. They were forced to go down to earth and observe from there the events of the final conflict. Lucifer and his evil tribe were to give it their best shot, and that they have done. His high water mark was reached on the Mount of Temptation, but on 3 simple temptations hinged the fate of the universe. The liar came oh so close, but in his heart he knew it was not to be. He could not defeat the God that created him. When Jesus returned to heaven after his crucifixion, the battle of heaven was fought. Satan and his legions stood their ground. Wasn't this their home also? But Satan, by his own choice, had forfeited his right to live in the heavenly kingdom, his right to exist. This battle was over almost before it started. The blitzkrieg of the heavenly legions was unlike any other in the history of the universe. Lucifer was no match for the King of Kings. God, Christ, and Lucifer could no longer coexist. Proof of God's authority was forever established, and the first and last war of heaven was over. Woe again rears its ugly head. Woe to the earth, because it had been declared the devil's permanent residence. Woe to the earth, because the devil now knows his days are numbered and he must work feverishly to win as many humans as possible to his cause. This will accomplish two goals. One, to take as many down with him for his own satisfaction, a moral or rather an immoral victory. Number two, to cause further pain to his foe, his creator. The eternal optimist, he wants to make one last-ditch stand to avoid oblivion. He spent 2,000 years on this earth, likely placing one of his evil angels opposite the guardian angel that each of us has to protect us. No doubt, in certain circles of power, he places legions of angels attempting to dream up every possible way to deceive the weak human spirit. We are no match for his complex nor even his simple methods. Christ gave us the only way out. We have only to say yes. That is the only power that man can exercise, a simple yes or no. A single vote by each person will determine his fate. This is the only act neither God or Satan cannot perform for mankind. As in any other election, the candidates are there, the commercials are airing, each party is spending every last dollar, every last ounce of energy to win the campaign of the ages. The polls are open, but it is an election that cannot be fixed. You alone can cast your ballot. The latter part of chapter 12 deals with a 1260-year period. During this period, the Church of Christ struggles along in the wilderness. Satan could do no more than suppress this group of faithful for 1260 years. Their spirit, that is God's spirit, lived on. This frustrated the devil to such a degree that he turned now to even more vicious methods of torment of the remnant Jew and non-Jew alike. Revelation 12:14 describes the woman as being given two wings of a great eagle to soar away from the enraged devil. In addition to God's giving his faithful protection in Europe and the Eastern Hemisphere, this may symbolize the flight of people and their religions to the West. They escaped to a place of religious freedom, America. The bottomless pit was opened in 1798 when other measures had failed the evil one. Maybe the devil taunted God, accusing him of not being given a fair chance. Whatever the reason, this pit was opened and the devil proceeded with new determination, vigor, and weaponry to wear out God's people. Napoleon and his successors took war out of the Dark Ages and into the modern era. The war machines developed in the next 150 years created the devastation as never before. This time period culminated with the atomic bomb, giving man the power to destroy himself and the world. John repeatedly gives in his own words the descriptions of these awesome instruments of power and destruction. We now have the privilege of seeing the unfolding firsthand. By the end of the 150-year period of torment, man had developed weapons with sufficient power to destroy our world. This was a small victory for Lucifer. God had destroyed the world and started all over once before, at the time of the Great Flood. Now the devil had that power in his hot little hand. One push of the little red button in Omaha and another push in Moscow would be all it would take to wipe out the earth and force God to start all over again. This would buy the devil precious time to devise further schemes. The push of these buttons would start a chain reaction that could not be stopped, and the devil knew it would be a simple task to gain control of the leaders manning those tiny buttons. But God put his foot down. Christ has won the victory. The pain and agony of 2,000 years is more than enough. Starting over would accomplish nothing. The devil had already tormented man to the point of death, and yet God's followers had remained steadfast. Lucifer had massacred millions from 1798 until 1948, but accomplished nothing for his cause. These saints were tried by fire and were rewarded with a heavenly home. Not many nails are left to drive into the devil's eternal coffin, but ever the optimist, he will go down swinging and take as many as he can with him to that grave of eternal fire.